Hello and welcome. In the coming moments, you are about to hear a message that will unpack the truth from the Word of God and move you towards God's purpose for your life.
Series of message, and I began speaking to you last week from the subtitle, How to Leverage Knowledge Over Sin. How to leverage knowledge over sin. Now, during the course of our study last week, in Romans chapter number 7, the Apostle Paul, in his writing, vividly painted a picture of an ongoing battle of this dual nature within us, where the flesh, or what I would call the sin nature, wants to subdue the spirit or the righteous nature that is within us. And by so doing, the sin nature wants or desires to influence our thoughts and actions to act contrary to the will of God or contrary to our righteous nature. And I said to you last week that the battle between these two opposing natures is won by the one that we feed the most and give the most attention. In Galatians chapter number 6, in verse number 8, the Apostle Paul writes and says, "For he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption, but he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life." I want you to note the two nature that we saw last week out of Romans chapter number 7 here in Galatians chapter 6. And when Paul uses the term sowing, he's referring to investment. And I said just a few moments ago that the battle between these two opposing forces is won by the one that you constantly feed the most and the one that you give the most attention. Hence, I took you to this verse of scripture where Paul says, "For he who invests to his flesh." Now, when he talks about the flesh there, he's referring to the sin nature, because we saw this last week in Romans chapter number 7, verse 18. The Apostle Paul says that, he says, "In me there is nothing good." And he refers to his flesh. He said that is in my flesh. He said, "I find nothing good." Now, so when you look at that verse again, they put it back on the screen. Paul says, "He who sows or who invests into the flesh will of the flesh reap corruption, and vice versa. He who sows to the Spirit or invests to the Spirit nature, he will of the Spirit reap everlasting life." So the question this morning is, where have you been investing? To which of this nature have you been constantly investing? Which one have you been giving more attention to? See, that's why it's important that church is not a game. Church should be a lifestyle. And when you come to church, it's for you to be empowered with knowledge. It's a superior knowledge that supersedes, the life that wants to hinder you, the life that wants to draw you back, the old life you've always lived. That's why I said in the course of this discourse, I think last week or the week before, that if you are not experiencing transformation in your walk with God, there's something wrong with it. If you are not changing from the person you were when you first came to Jesus, that there's something obviously wrong with the process that you are going through. You need to go back and re-examine it. Church is not all about dressing up good. Church is not about just coming and falling on the floor crying. Church is not about just going through all the spiritual routines that we normally, are used to. But church is primarily about being transformed. And you're going to understand what I mean by that as we continue with our discourse this morning. So you need to really examine to which of these two nature are you making your daily investment. Are you sowing into the Spirit or are you sowing into the flesh? Now, go with me to Romans chapter 8, verse number 5. And I want you to see what the Apostle Paul reiterates here again about this same trajectory or line of reasoning or thinking. He says, "For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh. Now, I want to slow down a little bit and let's break down this verse. Because there are a few words I want you to take note of there. It says, for those who live their lives according to the dictates of the flesh. That's what Paul was referring to. Those who live their lives according to the dictates of the flesh, in the sense where the flesh influences your daily thoughts and your daily actions and thereby your daily experiences. He says those kind of people, the reason why they live being influenced or being dictated to by the flesh is because they set their minds on the things of the flesh. Now, the word set is a very, very important word, because that word set actually means to exercise. Says those who live according to the dictates of the flesh, those who as believers are being influenced by the flesh to live a carnal life on a daily basis, do so because they exercise their minds on the things of the flesh. So Paul is showing you how you end up living a carnal life. It's because you are exercising. The word exercise actually is the word to train. You're training your mind to be carnal. So you are carnal based on the fact that you have exercised or you have trained your mind to be so. That's why every day you wake up, there's a training going on. There's a routine going on. And that routine is going on in your mind. You're training your mind either to be carnal or you're training your mind either to be spiritual. Because look at the flip side of it. He said, but those who live according to the Spirit, they also do the same thing. They train their minds on the things of the Spirit. So in other words, what the Apostle Paul is saying here is that we are all creatures of habit. Are you listening to me? See, an habit or a memorized behavior is when you do something over and over again, such that the repetition of that action over time conditions your body to know how to do it better than your mind. See, that's why an habit is when your body has learned to do a routine or an action without requiring the aid of your mind. That's what an habit is. So can you imagine how many people living their lives unconsciously, living their lives without the mind involvement, because you have trained your body, so much to the point that the body knows how to do what you call a behavior or an habit without the mind being involved. That's why the habit becomes a reflex action. Without even thinking, you respond. Because the body knows how to do it so well to the point that your body now becomes your subconscious. Your body is now the memorized behavior. Are you listening to what I'm saying? That's what you call an habit. In other words, your body is on autopilot. Do you know that oftentimes when you fly and the pilot reaches, the peak of, in fact, the altitude, when it reaches the altitude that aircraft is supposed to be at, oftentimes, it's about 39,000 feet. When it reaches that 39,000 altitude, in the air, the pilot can actually engage on autopilot. So the plane is no longer flown by a person. That is scary, right? Do you know oftentimes when you go international, sometimes the pilot is just sitting there drinking coffee, eating, gisting with his co-pilot, and they're not touching the plane, they're not doing, the plane is on autopilot, the plane is flying itself. Do you know that oftentimes you are actually flying your life based on an habit you've memorized without your mind being involved? See, that is how most of us reproduce certain outcomes that we don't want in our lives. Now, this is how it works. Now, neuroscience helps us to understand that we all think about 60 to 70,000 thoughts per day. And 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts as the day before. 90%. That means every day you wake up, you only think 10% new thoughts. 90% of the thoughts that you think every day is 90% of what you thought yesterday that you thought from the beginning of the year. We're in November. So can you imagine how much you exercise the brain or the mind capacity? So minimal. So there are no new thoughts going on. It's the same old thought that is just repeating itself. So it's important that you understand that your predominant thoughts, because if 90% of what you think every day is the same thought as the other day, as the other week, as the other month, as the other years, you need to understand that 90% of your predominant thoughts is what actually creates your future. Proverbs chapter 23 verse number 7 says, as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. As he thinketh in his heart, the Hebrew says, so he would become. Now, I want you to understand how you've been reproducing some of the outcomes that you probably don't want in your life. You need to understand the science of it and the spirituality of it as well. And here is how it works. Now, I said to you that 60 to 70,000 thoughts that you think every day, 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts as the day before. So those same thoughts always lead to the same choices. And the same choices always leads to the same behavior. The same behavior creates the same experiences. The same experiences reproduces the same emotions. And those very emotions is what drives the same very thoughts that now creates the same experiences all over again. Now that's how we get the definition of insanity. And it is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. So you can understand the reason why a lot of people are expecting a different outcome in their lives and they have never changed the trajectory. They never have changed the source from which all of their experiences are being produced. So they are thinking the same thoughts every day. See, as I'm sharing this with you, I want your mind to go to work. So that, you see, like I said, the key purpose why we gather in church is for us to experience a transformation in our lives. And God forbid in Bethesda that you are so like inoculated with this fairy tale idea where you think that there's an angel coming from heaven to change your life. There was a man who believed that and sat at the pool for 38 years until Jesus came and said, ain't you going to do something about your life? God didn't design you for, daily interventions. God designed you for daily creations. You've got to create the life you want. See, it's not somebody coming to intervene and give you the life you desire. See, that's why God made you like himself. Ye are gods. You heard that earlier on. And as a mini God or a subordinate God to the Almighty God, God gave you the same qualities, gave you the same essence, gave you the same ability to act like him. That's why he said, let us make man in our image after our own likeness. After our own likeness. He said, let them operate like us. Every one of you sitting here, you are designed to operate like God. But the reason why you are not is because somebody has not taught you the knowledge. That's why you're sitting in church. And you need to understand that when you sit in an atmosphere like this, you've got to talk to your flesh. And say to your flesh, sit down and learn. Because the flesh is unruly. The flesh don't want to learn. That's why when you go into a teaching atmosphere, the flesh doesn't like anything that will advance it because the flesh is an enemy of you. The flesh wants to sabotage your future. See, that's why the flesh loves lawlessness. The flesh loves to do the wrong thing. See, that's why the flesh will eat and binge eat. But when it comes to exercising, the flesh don't want it. The exercise that will keep you healthy, the flesh don't want it, but rather he wants to do things that will kill you. Things that will give you high blood pressure. The flesh loves things that will give you cholesterol. The flesh loves all of those funny things. It exercises itself in those stuff. But when you want to do what will counter what the flesh has done negatively to you, the flesh fights back. You go to the gym for 1 week, then you hear what the flesh will start talking. I don't like this thing you're doing. But yet it tells you, let's go to the fridge and have another piece of cake at 11 p.m. Let's have some chocolate at 11 p.m. The flesh loves it and it's never tired. He's never tired of doing foolish stuff, things that will kill you. See, that's why if you live by the flesh going to kill you. So it takes people who have discipline in order to master the flesh, because this flesh is lawless. So how you think and how you act and how you feel is what we call your personality. And your personality, hear that word, personality, is what creates your personal reality. Because in personality, there is reality there. See, that's why it ends with L-I-T-Y. That L-I-T-I stands for reality. Personality is what creates your personal reality. Did you get that? So if you want to create a new personal reality, here's a couple of things you have to do. You've got to change your personality. If you want to create a new personal reality, you've got to change your personality. So number one, here's what you do. Number one, you will have to become aware of every unconscious thoughts. And when I talk about unconscious thoughts, I'm talking about unconscious negative thoughts that you think daily and decisively change them. Proverbs 4 verse number 23, it says in the Classic Amplified, it says, keep and guard your heart with all vigilance. And above all that you guard, he says, for out of it flow the springs of life. So he said, keep and guard your mind with all vigilance. You have to be vigilant over your mind. You have to be vigilant over the unconscious negative thoughts. Why do I call it unconscious negative thoughts? Because they are becoming memorized thoughts. Remember that your body is the one doing it now because it doesn't need the aid of your mind anymore. So you've got to be conscious of the things that you are doing. Be conscious of your negative thoughts that you think every day and make every effort to change it. That's the first thing. The second is that you have to pay a serious attention to the habits and the behaviors that is creating your experiences and get rid of them. Here's what Paul says in Colossians chapter 3, verse number 5. He says, and I want to read this from the Classic Amplified. He says, so kill, deaden, deprive of power. See, that's your responsibility. He didn't say God's going to do this for you. He says, so you kill, deaden, deprive of power, or put to death the evil desire lurking in your members. Your members refers to your flesh. Remember I told you that last week that the sin nature dwells in your flesh. That's what Paul told us in Romans chapter number 7. So he says, the evil desire lurking in your members, those animal impulses, and all that is earthly in you that is employed in sin. So the sin nature wants to employ you to sin. Then these are the manifestation, or these are, like I said last week, remember I said the sin nature is the virus, right? And I said the sins that you commit, they are the symptoms. So here are the symptoms that you manifest when you allow the sin nature to employ you to sin. So can you imagine the sin nature employing you to sin? You become an employee of the sin nature. Then you carry out its works or its deeds. And these are some of the manifestations of his work. He says sexual vice, Speaks of fornication, adultery, all kinds of sexual vice you can think of. Impurity, sensual appetites, unholy desires, and all greed and covetousness. He said, for that is idolatry, the deifying of self and other created things instead of God. Now look at verse number 8. It goes on and says, but now, he said, put away and rid yourselves completely of all these things. Now, the things I mentioned to you earlier on in verse number 5, such as sexual vice, impurity, covetousness, all of those are sins that have become an habit. These are memorized behavior. That's why he says you need to get rid of this memorized behavior, including this: anger, rage, bad feeling toward others, curses and slander, and foul-mouthed abuse and shameful utterances from your lips. Now, the third thing you need to do to change your personality or your personal reality, all right, and by so doing changing your personality, is that you have to consciously pay attention to the emotions or the feelings that you live by every day that is connected to your past, and you would have to decide if those emotions or feelings have got any place in your future. Are you listening to me? See, because here's what you need to understand. What you feel is ultimately what you experience. Emotions are what you feel. See, what you feel is as real as you having the thing. That is why, in a positive sense, when you believe God for something, you visualize it. When you visualize it, the visualization of that thing should actually get to the point where you feel it. You emote it. If you don't feel it, you don't have it yet. See, this is a training. You've got to train yourself. See, understand how God created you. If you understand how God created your physiology and your psychology to work in synchronization, then, creating the future you want is not something that is far-fetched anymore. It's not something that you are waiting on somebody to do for you. You become the creator of your own future, and you create it when you want it. Why? Because you've understood the process. It's conception, visualization, conception, and after conception, then you verbalize. When you verbalize, then you get to the place, the more you say. Remember what I spoke earlier on about vibration. Because when you start verbalizing, you are creating a vibration, and what the vibration does, that it begins to affect your emotions. It begins to affect your feeling. Because remember, like I said, during the admonition, that when a bad news comes to you, it changes your atmosphere. It affects how you feel. If you were happy 5 minutes ago, you got a bad news, all of a sudden, all your happiness dissipates. And what happens? You feel sadness, you feel sorrow. You begin to feel something based on what you heard. See, that's why when you keep on speaking the promise of God, you must speak it to the point that you start feeling that money is here. That's a sign that you know you got it, or that thing is going to show up. So what you feel ultimately becomes what you experience.
Thank you for listening in. We hope that this word has uplifted and empowered you and will cause you to become all that God has called you to be. Bethesda Christian Center, empowering kingdom people with kingdom word for kingdom living.